Hey, I'm excited to chat with you today about my passion, data, and certainly fast moving science surrounding it, which is also my passion, not only in the short term as we recover, but more importantly, the generational change required to truly trust data driven decision making. I hope to do this in less than 10 minutes by taking a crack at four key questions. What data is meaningful and missing? How do we bridge the gap? What does the future hold? And in the last couple of minutes, a visual tour of some recent data. Let's get started. To me, the simple answer to what data is meaningful is any and all data that facilitates trustworthy, actionable advice, preferably very quickly. We all trust the weather forecast, right? A little hang loose, maybe not so much trusting the weather forecast. Well, as it turns out, the weather forecasting is a fairly good metaphor for modern data analytics. A fast moving front is moving in rain today and for another one tomorrow. Our reaction to that prediction is the next day closely mirrors AI based data analytics. We'll see where you'll see a bunch of IVE suffix words, which essentially follow the same pattern. How and why did we get here and what is likely to happen? And using that prediction to both prevent bad things and facilitate good things, again, as quickly as possible. I'd like to share with you a recent experience with truly meaningful travel data. With partners BCG and the Airline Reporting Corporation, a project was conceived in early March to help travel industry track and react to the ongoing pandemic. The goal was to create an interactive analysis app facilitating a dramatically extended purchase funnel that included new transitions like the ability to travel, government restrictions and whatnot, consumer travel sentiment, and never before seen user search demand data. One day in early March, with not a lawyer in sight, 30 folks were added to a Slack channel. And in a few weeks later, a publicly available, as it turns out, quite popular worldwide app was launched. You can see the thumbnail of that original funnel on the left and the next generation predictive work in progress with BCG Lighthouse. A bit more about funnels. As business models are updated during the recovery, chasing demand will be at the forefront. This requires new models, new data sets, and in many cases, old, tired, and true data sets to up their game, both in velocity and the cost and price of those data sets. A key will be concentrating on the rate of change of each funnel step, which holds a ton of predicted value. I would also be remiss not to mention alternative data. Historically very popular with hedge funds, this data can be quite useful in the context of next generation modeling. Link shorteners, which I'll talk a bit about later, foot traffic, events, restaurant reservations, and the like. Several exchanges and brokers facilitating access to alternative data, like the AWS Data Exchange and Battlefin, already have rich libraries that are worth checking out. On the question of what data is missing, unfortunately, in many cases, it's yours. No, it hasn't been hacked or ransomed or accidentally deleted. It's just the fact that historical data for demand modeling in many cases has been rendered nearly useless for the foreseeable future. But it could be worse. You actually do have the data, but internal access is overly onerous. This is especially true with your most important high velocity data, which may be being stuffed into data warehouses at a low velocity, making it unavailable right away for analytics. Now is the perfect time during the reset for generational change in your internal data practices, focusing on moving to as near as real time as possible. It's just not me saying this. Forrester has an excellent report entitled Perishable Insights, circa the tail end of 2016, which has been especially prescient during the pandemic. Let me summarize it for you. The actionable half-life of data is getting progressively smaller, requiring faster data capture, analytics, and reactions that are likely to make or break, and I'm going to mention that again, make or break many companies' futures. The inset on the left from the report shows companies in the long tail of data analytics, month, week, daily processing, for example, compared to where they need to be as close to real time as possible. Internally, we are doing R&D with all sorts of real-time data, including higher-level real-time funnel data from Bitly, a link shortener, where first-party like content is uncovered as short links are clicked and unfurled, and the content is read at that destination and modeled for real-time travel intent. That creates a complete funnel from top to bottom, as shown on the left-hand side there. In another twist, as companies like Apple and Google ostensibly react to privacy concerns by eliminating cookies, by the way, cookies are the currency of e-commerce, tracking and advertising, it makes sense to start thinking about including some of that meaningful data described earlier in your data strategy. Now that I've highlighted the meaningful and missing data gap, how do we go about bridging it? I keep coming back to the same word, trust. Trust in data and its byproducts only comes with a very heavy dose of verify. The L in machine learning, or ML, means both yours and the machine's time to learn. It takes time. Dip your toe in now. You'll thank me later. A word on organizational data democratization. It's an absolute prize fight. The reigning champion, IT-driven centralized data, defaulting to lockdown with only need to know access, versus the upstart contender, who I'm betting on, where everything is open to the organization by default, only locking down the most sensible data. Don't take my word for this trend. Even companies with the most highly sensitive financial data are starting to take this approach, including MasterCard, as noted on the left. I also think it's very vital that you benchmark your internal data with external wisdom of the crowd big data to make sure you haven't been or are entering into an echo chamber. We are in a reset. New thinking, data, and processes are in order. It's a perfect time to test the status quo. In regards to acquiring talent, it is much easier to snag someone from the jaws of big tech, and I do a lot of data science recruiting, if your tools and data environment are state of the art. The diagram on the left is the mythical data science unicorn, 1/3 each, computer science, math, and subject matter expertise. Do not worry, they don't exist, and that's okay. A team-based unicorn approach is a great way to do data science, and it is your best bet. So what does the future hold? I believe the data economy is in its infancy with a very bright future. In fact, I'm counting on it. For those so inclined, I highly recommend the Book of Why. You can find it on Amazon. As computers begin to answer why questions. Skip over all the funky math symbols. You can do that, it's no big deal. In the category of thornier data issues, I wanted to a shout out to Richard Harris, who best I can tell, coined the term datagopolist, simply asking the question, will big tech eventually own and hoard most of the relevant travel data that we may need? In the area of data ethics, one of the things that has my attention is touchless travel, where data sharing between these touchless points is fraught with all sorts of potential security issues. Also, intellectual property and use rights become very tricky in a world where B to B to B to B to B C to C becomes the norm in the data economy. Finally, on the good news front, travel can ride on the coattails of rapid advancements and yearly cost savings related to the Internet of Things and cloud computing. Let me take you on a very quick trip around some data. First, on the left-hand side, you'll see the entire data set for the United States and touching the United States. You can see the huge drop off in March there that occurred. You can see a little bit of rebound in the summer. And then when we had issues in Florida and southern states, Texas, Arizona, and California, you can see that ended quickly. And you see a nice kind of recovery. If I zoom in on the right for what happened last week during some vaccine announcements, you can actually see they were fairly muted. But on the flip side, when you get government restrictions lifted, like on the bottom side, when Canada and US lifted some visiting friends and relative restrictions, you see this typical pattern, which is As soon as they announce it, a huge spike in demand. And then when it's implemented, another spike as people wait to the last minute. I also thought it'd be interesting to show off some Russian data too, where you see something similar to the big dip, the summer growing, and as COVID starts to hit in the wintertime, a muted response. Also, we see some green shoots here. This is what I like to call green shoots and withering type data, where we're basically looking at week over week changes. So what you see here is, just as I noted before, a 4% US week over week vaccine response, pretty muted, but Cuba and Chile up 50% week over week, and that's based on some restriction lifting announcements that occurred. Also, some significant drops to Eastern Europe and China week over week, for example. This data was actually pulled on Tuesday, so it's pretty fresh. So this is what I like to call my business leisure segmentation storm tracker. It's going to be an actual video when I click, and I'll narrate it as it goes here. But what you see is on the horizontal axis, week over week, the vertical axis is year over year. In a perfect world, in the middle, you'll see that would be nothing has changed year over year. So as I actually fire this up, you can actually see, looking at a variety of different items, you can see the actual dots are between two different states. And as I go back in time history, we can actually track the storm as we go through this. So in these cases, we've seen things like people wanting to go where no humans are. So Montana, Wyoming, for example, getting a huge amount of recent queries in the middle of this uptick and spike. And you can see the data, that big drop that occurs in March, and then it vacillates week over week back and forth. The cool thing about business and leisure segmentation is you can see each of those small segments and where you might be concentrating on those next generation items. Also, this is actually bit.ly link shortening data. Each of those little dots on the graph represent a zip code where people are clicking on travel related links. It's then taken and correlated with search data that's been debotted in demand. So we get this perfect funnel segmented by time-based things like day of the week, hour of the day, and so forth. That ends my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks a lot for joining us today. So you have mentioned that travel companies do have data. The problem is it's not used enough or not shared enough. So what do travel companies need to do better to get the best out of their data and AI and machine learning?
Yeah, I think if in my presentation, sort of the first things that always come to mind are trustworthiness. I think you always have to trust the data. There's a lot of verification. It's all new. It's a little bit of voodoo in some cases. You have to be able to handle some of those things. I think most people, the best way to sort of approach it is most people start off with kind of a strategic view of this. How do I see the data? How do I look at KPIs? How do I track what's going on? How do I see some of that? And take the winnings from that strategic stuff and try to sort of bake that into more informed real-time decision making. Of course, we think it's important for the future to be able to make super real-time decisions, but I think the other thing too is if you're democratizing data within your organization, you'll find what happens is you'll find a bunch of what I call data spelunkers that you didn't know existed in your organization. And so if you have everything locked down in a traditional way and you can only get at it in those cases, what ends up happening is you don't find out that you have 4 or 5 clever people that could, if they actually had access to the data pretty easily, could do all sorts of interesting stuff.
Yes, exactly. Talking about the bigger picture, considering the devastating impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the travel industry, do you think it's high time for the industry to come together to be more open to sharing data so that this asset that has been lying around unused or underused for so long can help accelerate recovery? And how can that be done?
Absolutely, I do. And I think, again, I mean, a lot of people think their proprietary data has value in it, then nobody should see it, for example. we see a lot of things like give to get relationships where you have cooperatives for certain data assets, especially in the context of big tech, who in many cases could be, and especially the cookieless world, which is coming to us very quickly, where they may have a bunch of data that we really want. We may have to all band together and actually share that data together. So I think there's several reasons for actually doing that. So ultimately, that sharing of data is really less about the data itself, but how the techniques used to mine data to make sure you're not in an echo chamber, to benchmark your data. And then, of course, data ethics is a super big part of that too, when you do share data, and making sure that nothing, for example, privacy wise, or for that matter, that can be inferred from that privacy occurs.
Cool. I just want to shift gears a little here. Whenever we talk about data analytics, we talk about how data might help companies, travel companies, gauge demand and make decisions. My question is, how can the same data be help consumers feel safer, or to give them that seamless booking and travel experience? How can that be done?
Yeah, no, I think consumers are very resourceful already. They do a lot of comparison shopping, comes to mind as one of the ways they like to do all. They gather information. I have a neighbor next door that writes down the prices of our airline tickets on a little pad. I see it there when we go visit periodically. I'm a huge fan of alerting products. I think those are those are really good for consumers. Like Hopper has a great version of some of that stuff. And by the
Sure.
way, those kind of alerts and notifications, whether they're email or pushed to an app, they have typically a tenfold increase in open rates by consumers. And they really love to get alerts, especially when they're actionable. I personally am not a huge fan of showing somebody shopping for travel the equivalent of a stock chart so they can pick the stocks for the next few days. Not a huge fan of that, especially on a phone where there's not a lot of screen real estate. And I'm not a fan of buy now predictions, although I love the data science and I've actually helped companies actually create those predictions as part of those things. I just think that you know ultimately you're only as good as your last prediction, and if people don't believe your algorithm and you're predicting stuff, it's pretty bad. I think the only company that I'm aware of that's really got that trustworthiness is Google.
Yes. So I think we're out of time. Thank you, Rick. Thanks for joining us today. It was
Hey, I
wonderful
appreciate it.
talking to you.
Thanks.